that this tree will not have fruit throughout the season, throughout the year. But when it's season to produce fruit, it will produce fruit. Hi everybody, welcome back. My name is Simon. Psalm Sunday today. So today we're going to be focusing on Psalms 1 verse 1 to 3. Psalms chapter 1 verse 1 to 3. Here we go. How happy is the one who does not walk in the advice of the wicked, or stand in the pathway of sinners, or sit in the company of mockers. Instead, his delight is in the Lord's instruction, and he meditates on it day and night. He is like a tree planted beside flowing streams that bears fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. Whatever he does prospers. Read it one more time. How happy is the one who does not walk in the advice of the wicked, or stand in the pathway with sinners, or sit in the company of mockers. Instead, his delight is in the Lord's instruction, and he meditates on it day and night. He is like a tree planted beside flowing streams that bears its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. Whatever he does prospers. So this psalm is basically a snapshot that gives us a lot of very valuable information. So this psalm is talking about walking with God, how we can walk with God, and the benefits that we get when we walk with God. So just a few things I want to point out. Number one is it tells us how to walk with God. So how do we walk with God? Verse number 2, by delighting in the Lord's instructions. What are Lord's instructions? That's his word. So we have the Bible, that's his word. By delighting in the Lord's instructions, delighting in his ways. And the other thing that we should do is avoiding things that contradict God's word. Not walking in the advice of the wicked, not standing in the pathway of sinners, and not sitting in the company of mockers. So avoiding things that contradict God's word or God's desire, and reading his word and delighting in his word, and most of all, most importantly, meditating on his word. Another thing I want to point out is the benefit of following God's precepts, or following God's ways, and walking with him, and that's going to be verse 3. He is like a tree. So whoever delights in God's instructions and meditates on it day and night, he is like a tree planted beside flowing streams that bears fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither, and whatever he does prospers. In that verse number 3, I want to point out two things. Number one, the part where it says, and its leaf does not wither. So this psalm compares someone who's walking with God, reading God's word, meditating on God's word. It compares that person with a tree that's planted by a flowing stream. Now, if you imagine a tree that's planted by a flowing stream, you know that that tree never dries up. Even when you have a dry season, when it's very dry, that tree is always green and alive. The leaves are always vibrant, they are always green. Leaves signify life. Especially when you see green leaves, that is a sign of life. So this tree also always has life in it. Why? Because it's planted close to a constant source of water. Water is life. Spirit is life. God's word is life. So when we bury ourselves in God's word, that word is life. So that word will constantly infuse in us life. So we will never wither. Another thing I want to point out is the part where it says that bears fruit in its season. He's like a tree planted beside flowing streams that bears its fruit in its season. You notice that when it comes to leaves, it doesn't say the leaves will not wither in a specific season. It says the leaves will never wither. But when it comes to fruit, it says the tree will produce fruit in its season. So that tells me one thing, that this tree will not have fruit throughout the season, throughout the year. But when it's season to produce fruit, it will produce fruit. But when it comes to this tree being alive, the leaves will always be green all year long, regardless of what season you're in. Now, here's what that tells me, that walking with God, truly walking with God in His truth and following His precepts, following and delighting in His instructions, meditating on His instructions, will always give you life in you. That life He infuses in you. But the fruit of walking with God comes in its season. So a lot of us, we want to connect with God and we want to see the fruit right away. I mean, if you cannot plant a seed and stand right there and say, now I'm waiting for harvest time, now I want to harvest. No, you cannot even go back the next day or the next week expecting a harvest, because when you plant, it takes time between when you plant to the time where you harvest. So there's time. So fruit comes in its season. So the same way when we walk with God, when you start walking with God, you may not see the fruit right away, but in due season you start seeing the fruits. This usually is the cause of many people who walk with God for a short period of time and they don't see any effects. They don't see any benefits right away. They don't see any fruits right away, and they just give up. But the Lord doesn't want us to have short-term relationships with Him. Just when we need something, that's when we go to Him. No, He wants us to have a long-term relationship with Him, that we are always connected to Him, and He promises to always give us that life that He gives in us. But when it comes to fruit, it's those who persist in pursuing Him that will see the fruit. So my encouragement for you today is, don't just seek God when you need. Don't just seek God for a few weeks and then think, I don't think I'm making any headway here, so I'm just forget it. No, pursue God. His word says that in due season you'll see the fruit. In due season you'll see the harvest. I hope you have a beautiful week. God bless you.